In this tutorial, we're going to create a single polygon face with a two-sided texture, which means that one side of the same polygon will have a different texture on it than the other. So you can see in Arnold render view that the Joker graphic is on one side, and then there's a design that pretty much looks like a regular card on the other. And you'll also notice that the geometry is blank in the viewport. So we have to make sure that when we start to develop this, there's a light and we're using the Arnold render view. We're going to cover all that in this tutorial. But first, we're going to start by creating the card. I'm going to start out modeling the card in the side view. I'll hold down the space bar. I'm going to go to Create, Curve Tools, and Bezier Curve Tool. And I'm going to start to create that rounded rectangle that a card would really be made of. So I'll start to plot my points, clicking and dragging where I want curves, clicking and letting go where I need a straight line, and so on. I would go around. I could use a template. I could have put an image plane in with a real card, but I'm using the wireframe of the completed card for my template. And I'll go around the perimeter. And if you recall, in Maya, your inclination might be, if you used Illustrator, to try and close the shape out. I'm going to leave this area open. I'll hit return. So now I have this open shape, because in Maya, the best way to do this is, once you've gone to your object mode for your path, hold down your space bar, go to curves, and click on open close, and it closes the shape out. Now if I needed to, I could go in and refine these edges or the points with the control vertex. And if you wanted to, you get very close, select it, and I'll hold down X on the keyboard and I'll snap it to the grid. This will assure me of a shape that is pretty close to what I would want. And I'll do that for each of the points. Holding down the X and snapping to the grid. And now we're ready to make this into a piece of geometry. I'll right-click once I finish my editing, go back to the object mode. I'm going to go to my perspective view. I'll turn this off so we don't need the template shape anymore. And I'm going to hold down the space bar and I'm going to go to Surfaces and I'm going to choose Bevel Plus. Now usually just choosing the default settings will get you what you need. I'm going to make sure that there's no bevel on this because the card doesn't have a bevel on it like a piece of wood. So I'll zero out the bevel and the bevel depth. And I'm going to make the extrude depth 0.25, so I have a little thickness to work with, and you'll see why in a moment. I'll click on Apply and it fills my geometry in. Now we only need one polygon face from this whole thing. All I need to do is right click, choose faces. I'm going to select all of the faces. And then I'm going to shift select the one I want to keep, which is this flat face in the front. I'll hit delete. And now what I'm left with is just that single face. And that is the single polygon on which we'll plot a back and front texture. I'll go to delete by type history. I'll return back to my object mode and I'll send to my pivot. All we need to do now is add our two-sided texture. I'll right click and I'll choose Assign New Material. I'll go to Arnold and you'll see that in the Arnold menu you're going to see a choice for AI two-sided. I'll click on it. In your attributes you'll see your two-sided texture. I'm going to name this card. And I'm going to add to the front view, you can see it says view, there's no node like you would see in the regular Arnold. I'm going to follow the front, I'm going to click on the checkerboard, and I'm going to choose 2D texture because I want to add that checker box to it, the one that we use when we start to introduce a file. Now you'll notice that when you do that, you don't see the checkerboard, even if you hit 6. So I've put in a spotlight, and I'm making the spotlight intensity, I'm going to make it 5 for now. Now before I bring up the Arnold render view, I'm going to use planar mapping on the geometry. And in this particular piece of geometry, the x-axis is perpendicular to the surface I'd like to see the texture plotted on. So I'll select my geometry, hold down the space bar, I'll go to UV, planar mapping, and I'm going to choose X, and I'll hit apply. Now I've got the coordinates there, but what I need to do is make sure that the projection width and height of that planar mapping is equal. So I'm going to go to the channel box, and in the channel box I want to make sure projection width and height are the same. I'm going to make both of these 15, and now I'll go back to my object mode. I'll go to Arnold, Arnold render view, I'll click on the red triangle, and now you'll see that default checkerboard pattern that we made. Now if I go to my UV editor, I'll see that there is also the UV map that's been generated, and you can see it here. I'll right click, choose UV shell, and because it's very close to the very edges of the file, I'm going to scale it in just a little bit so I have a little bit of wiggle room around the perimeter of the whole thing. Next we'll go back to our object mode, select our geometry once again, and then the UV editor, I'm going to go to Image, UV Snapshot, and I'll browse and save this into my project window. I'm going to save that and click on Apply and Close. Now the one UV map will serve plotting the texture on the back and the front. And in Photoshop, we'll be duplicating this PNG we just rendered so that we can have 2 separate texture maps, one for the back of the card, one for the front. So the next thing we'll do is we'll open our PNG in Photoshop. I've opened up the .png that was generated inside of Maya, and I've put a white background on a blank layer below the UV map so we can see the outline of the UV a little bit more clearly. Now I'm going to be saving 2 PSDs with this content, and I've already created the art I want to use, and then I'm going to copy and paste each piece of art to its own respective PSD. So if I was to pull them in, here's one side of the card and here's the other side. So I'm going to minimize this one for a second, and I'm going to copy and paste this art into the PNG. And I want to go and place that where it should be. You can see it's pretty much lined up, but I'll go ahead and center it a little bit better. And I'm going to save this. And I'm saving it as a PSD in case I have to come back and redesign this any capacity. I can always access it and do so. Now I'm going to go to Image Duplicate, and that gave me a complete second copy of the front of the card. So I'm going to save the original front card that we just generated, and I'll close that out. For the next one, I'll delete the Joker front, and I'll grab the graphics that I've created for the design back of the card, and I'll copy and paste that in to the second copy of the whole PSD, and I'll save that as the back of the card. Now we're ready to go back into Maya and apply it to the 3D polygon plane. I've opened up my polygon plane in Maya and I'm selecting it because now I'm going to swap out the textures I just made for each side of this single polygon face. I'll right click, choose Material Attributes, and I'll go to the Material Attribute, and I'm going to right click on Front and choose Break Connection to get rid of the checkerboard. I'll click on the checkerboard at the end of the text box for Front. I'll choose 2D Texture, and then I'll click on File, and I'll go out to my folder, and I'll select my UV texture, and I'll select my PSD front, and there's the front of the card. I'm going to go back and put the back graphic on as well. So I'll click on the box right next to the word File 4. There are two of them, little boxes with triangle. I'll click on the lower one. It returns me back to where I can introduce, once again, the 2D texture we generated for the back of the card as well. And if I spin my card in the viewport, I can see I have both textures placed on that single polygon face.